He left her for another. 5 years later, he sees 2 little girls with his eyes. He chose ambition and status over the woman he loved. A chance encounter reveals the life he missed, forcing him to fight for the family he never knew existed. Can a man who once chose money over love ever earn back the trust of the woman he shattered? The cold calculus of ambition. He shut the door on her with the words, "Don't stand in my way. I'm marrying someone else." 5 years later, he broke down at the sight of 2 little girls with his exact eyes. Elena Chavez never imagined a single sentence could change the entire course of her life. Yet, as she stood in Marcus Sterling's private office, surrounded by polished granite and floor-to-ceiling glass that showcased the city he ruled, she felt the air around her turn cold, sharp, and ruthless. His presence once made her feel safe, adored, chosen, but now the man she loved looked at her as if she were an inconvenience blocking the path to his flawless future. He was the epitome of success, his dark hair perfectly slicked back, a costly suit tailored to perfection, and brown eyes that usually burned with ambition, but today held nothing more than irritation and impatience. She had rehearsed every possible way to tell him the truth growing inside her, a truth she had carried alone for weeks while gathering the courage to speak it. 2 heartbeats pulsed beneath hers, small and innocent, and full of possibility. She pressed her trembling fingers against her stomach, as if the touch could give her strength. She wanted to imagine his excitement, the shock followed by joy, the way he might smile and pull her into his arms while whispering that everything would be okay. Instead, her fantasy was shattered before she could even open her mouth. "Don't stand in my way. I'm marrying someone else." His voice was low, but vicious in its finality, a declaration meant to pierce through any hope she had left. He didn't yell. He showed no anger. His indifference was worse than cruelty. Elena blinked, feeling her heart shatter with an intensity she swore the entire building must have heard. She stared at him, searching for even a glimmer of warmth, a sign that this was a moment he would regret, that he still remembered the nights they shared, their laughter, the way he once looked at her like she was the only person who truly understood him. Instead, she watched him reach for his jacket with calm confidence, as if he hadn't just destroyed the life forming inside her. She took a step towards him, her lips parting, ready to speak the truth that might save them both from future suffering. Yet, the words froze on her tongue when he raised a hand slightly, already dismissing her as if she were nothing more than an error he wished to delete. His eyes shifted from her to his schedule on the desk, his next meeting, his next conquest in the world of power and wealth. In that moment, she realized he didn't see her at all. She was invisible in the story he chose to live. The hurt was so intense it nearly stole her breath. Her vision swam with tears she refused to let fall. Not there, not in front of him. Pride was the only shield she had left. Elena straightened her shoulders, wrapped her trembling arms tightly around herself, and forced her legs to move. She walked toward the door with as much grace as she could muster, refusing to fall apart until she was far from his gaze. She paused for a fraction of a second, waiting, longing, praying for him to call her name. He didn't. She stepped out into the hallway, and only then did the tears spill over, hot and uncontrollable. The world outside his office kept spinning as if nothing had happened, as if her heart wasn't shattered behind those closed doors. She hurried toward the exit, one hand still covering her stomach protectively. She whispered an apology to the little lives growing inside her, silently promising them she would love them enough for all 3, that she would fight to give them a future even if their father chose not to know them. Outside, the city lights blurred through her tears, turning the world into a smear of brilliant, distant dreams. She felt utterly alone, terrified beyond measure, But she refused to let the fear win. Elena wiped her face roughly with the back of her hand. She took a deep breath that tasted of pain and resolve, and kept walking. Every step away from Marcus felt like a battle against gravity, but also a step towards something she didn't yet understand. She wouldn't beg him to stay. She wouldn't tell him she carried his children. She wouldn't let his coldness define her or the beautiful lives inside her. He had chosen his path. Now she would choose hers, even if she had to build it with shaky hands and a heart stitched only with hope and fierce love. That night, she curled up alone, her arms wrapped protectively around her belly, listening to the silent rhythm inside her. It reminded her she wasn't truly alone. 2 small miracles needed her, and she would give everything she had, even the broken pieces of her heart, to ensure they never felt what she felt now. The future ahead looked dark and uncertain, but Elena promised her children she would survive it, no matter the cost. 2 little miracles. Pregnancy wasn't supposed to feel like a battle. Yet, every day for Elena became a test of how much a human heart can endure before breaking beyond repair. She worked as many hours as her body allowed, hiding morning sickness behind a forced smile, and ignoring the whispers of coworkers who noticed how pale and exhausted she had become. She never complained, because the moment she placed her hand over her growing belly, all the fear and loneliness briefly vanished, replaced by an overwhelming love that gave her the strength to keep going. She found solace imagining what her daughters would be like, visualizing 2 tiny faces pressed against her chest, 2 pairs of hands gripping her fingers, 2 reasons to keep breathing, even when life demanded more than she had. Medical bills mounted faster than she could pay them. She sacrificed meals to save money, choosing canned soup while ensuring adequate vitamins and nutrition for her unborn children. She read every book on motherhood she could borrow from the library, searching for guidance to help her raise twins alone. Nights were often sleepless, not from discomfort, but because fear whispered that she might fail them. She never allowed those thoughts to linger. She whispered back with determination that she would become everything they needed, even if she had no one to catch her when she fell. The day the doctor told her she was expecting identical twin girls, Elena cried tears she had held back for months. The ultrasound image showed 2 perfectly formed babies nestled together, their tiny hearts beating strong and steady. The doctor smiled and congratulated her, unaware that the children's father had chosen a different family before even knowing they existed. Elena pressed the printed photo against her chest once she was alone, studying it as if memorizing the proof that love still existed in her world. She made a silent vow that her daughters would always feel wanted, always feel cherished, and that no one would ever be allowed to make them doubt their worth. When Hazel and Holly were born, the delivery room was filled with chaos and joy all at once. Elena had no partner to hold her hand, no comforting voice telling her she was doing great. Instead, she set her jaw, screamed towards the sterile ceiling, and pushed through every contraction, with the primal knowledge that she was fighting for the 2 lives entirely dependent on her strength. Then, suddenly, the cries of 2 newborns filled the air, and everything else faded away. The nurses handed her 2 squirming miracles, pink and whimpering, and Elena felt her heart expand until it ached. They were more beautiful than anything she had ever seen, with soft brown wisps of hair already starting to show, and wide, curious brown eyes that blinked up at her with an innocence that squeezed her chest. Holding them for the first time was like finally coming home after being lost for too long. She named them Hazel and Holly, choosing names that felt strong yet sweet, names she hoped would match the brave, bright futures she wanted for them. Even through the exhaustion, even through the pain in her body and the fear of being alone, Elena felt a love so powerful it almost scared her. She whispered promises into their hair, telling them she would be their mother, father, and protector. They clung to her with instinctive trust, tiny fingers wrapping around hers like anchors that kept her from spiraling into despair. Motherhood was not gentle in the months that followed. Elena quickly learned that sleep became a luxury rarely afforded to her. Nights blurred into an endless cycle of feedings, crying, rocking, and diaper changes, while days were spent working just enough to keep food on the table. She often held one baby in one arm while preparing bottles with the other, singing lullabies through sheer exhaustion. Yet every tiny milestone, a first smile, a small giggle, the way Hazel always reached for Holly's hand before falling asleep, was a reward far greater than rest or comfort. As the girls grew, their personalities bloomed like flowers in uneven sunlight. Hazel was bold and spirited, always the first to crawl, the first to climb, fearless in ways that sometimes terrified Elena. Holly was thoughtful and observant, studying everything with solemn curiosity before daring to move. Though identical, Elena could tell them apart instantly, not by looks, but by the way their souls seemed to shine differently. The financial struggles never ceased. Elena counted every penny, sacrificing new clothes for herself, skipping doctor's appointments she should have attended, and refusing to ask anyone for help. Pride had become her armor, but it was her daughter's well-being that gave her the reason to keep fighting. She created a home for them, small, imperfect, but filled with warmth. Drawings decorated the walls, soft toys filled their bedroom, and the apartment echoed with the sound of two little girls discovering happiness in a world that expected them to have less. Sometimes, late at night, when the twins were asleep and the apartment was finally silent, Elena allowed herself to remember Marcus. She would lie awake wondering if his life was still so perfectly aligned with his ambitions, if he ever felt the absence of the family he didn't know he had. On those nights the pain returned, sharp and relentless, but she refused to dwell on it for long because she had learned the most important truth. She could survive without him. Hazel and Holly were 5 now, bright and sparkling, two small reflections of the man who had turned his back without hesitation. Elena made sure they were never short on love, even when money was tight. The girls thrived, their laughter loud, their spirits unbroken, and their hearts full. They didn't know the story of their origins, and Elena hoped to delay that difficult truth for as long as possible. She often caught herself studying their faces, thinking the world had given her 2 perfect reasons to keep believing in beauty, even after the ugliest moment of her life. And though she didn't know it yet, fate was preparing to test her darkest fears and deepest hopes anew. The past she tried so hard to run from was not done with her. She would soon come face to face with the man she once loved, and nothing would ever be the same. Don't let them go. Elena fought for 5 years. Will Marcus recognize his daughters? Comment your predictions now. Remember to like and subscribe. The Reckoning in the Park. Marcus Sterling had built a life that looked perfect from the outside, polished and gleaming like the skyline reflected in his penthouse glass walls. Yet, anyone looking closer would have seen the emptiness settling behind his confident smile. After the wedding that was supposed to secure his future, he quickly learned that a marriage built on convenience and status could never satisfy a heart desperate for something real, something warm, something like the love he once tossed away. His wife, Lauren, was elegant, intelligent, and perfectly aligned with the world he had chosen. But love had never been part of their agreement. Their conversations were formal, their dinners stiff and silent, and their touches always felt more like business deals than affection. Less than 2 years after saying their vows, they signed divorce papers with the same lack of emotion that characterized everything they did together. Marcus excelled at the only thing he had left: work. He expanded his company's reach, collected awards, grew profits, and garnered admiration from everyone in the financial sector. He convinced himself that ambition was enough. He tried to believe that the void in his life was simply the price of success. But every day felt more like he was playing a character instead of living a life. He attended lavish parties surrounded by people who praised him. Yet he constantly found excuses to leave early, claiming urgent business, though in reality, he couldn't stand being around laughter that didn't belong to him. He occasionally went on dates, mostly women who saw him as a trophy or an opportunity, but no matter how they smiled at him, he never felt drawn to any of them. He tried to bury Elena in the deepest corners of his mind, but memories of her surfaced at the most inopportune times, refusing to disappear. He remembered her laughter, genuine and free, the way she wrinkled her nose when she was trying not to cry, the softness in her eyes when she looked at him like he was more than the ruthless businessman he tried so hard to become. He told himself leaving her was the right decision, that he had chosen a better path, that life was easier without the chaos of emotion. Yet, the weight of regret grew heavier. Year after year, though he couldn't quite understand why, he sometimes imagined what would have happened if he had stayed. The thought squeezed his chest uncomfortably, so he would push it away and drown himself in work. But as 5 years passed, something in him began to shift, slowly and without permission. He caught himself watching families in parks, feeling a pang in his heart when he saw fathers lifting their children, laughing into the air. He found himself pausing near toy stores, pretending he was just looking at new marketing strategies, while silently imagining what gifts he might choose if he ever had a child to give them to. The idea of family, once a threat to everything he valued, now felt like the only thing missing. One day, during a meeting where his team celebrated another successful quarter, Marcus felt nothing. The applause around him, the congratulations, the expensive champagne being poured for toasts, it all slid off him like meaningless noise. He excused himself, walking away from his own celebration and staring at his reflection in the gleaming window walls overlooking the city. He looked powerful, confident, enviable, and utterly miserable. He pressed his palm against the glass, realizing with acute clarity that he could no longer recognize the person staring back. The loneliness became suffocating. His penthouse, once a symbol of victory, now felt like a prison. The silence within his walls grew louder every night, echoing everything he lost and everything he never allowed himself to want. He tried calling his old friends, but conversations turned shallow in seconds. He had no one he could talk to honestly. He wondered if Elena was still in the same city, if she had moved on, if she was happy, if she hated him. He had no answers, and the not knowing ate at him like hunger. It wasn't until he was forced to attend a corporate event in a city park, a public relations initiative with investors, that fate decided to stop giving him time to think. As he stood with business partners discussing development plans, the sound of carefree laughter reached him from a nearby playground. He ignored it at first, but the sound grew louder, clearer, impossible to overlook. He turned toward the noise and saw 2 little girls darting across the grass, their joy bright and untamed, their arms outstretched like small birds taking flight. Something inside him stopped abruptly. He stared, unable to look away, because these 2 girls were startlingly familiar. Their hair, an identical shade of rich brown to his own, bounced as they ran, and when one of them turned her head, the sun caught her eyes. Brown, deep, expressive, unmistakable. His heart slammed painfully as the recognition hit him with brutal force. He knew those eyes. He had seen them in the mirror all his life. As his pulse thundered, he frantically searched for their mother, desperate for confirmation and terrified of the truth he already knew. And then he saw her. Elena, standing just a few yards away, watching the girls with a smile that softened every part of her face. She looked stronger, more radiant than he remembered. Yet, he recognized the weariness she tried to hide, the weight she carried alone. Marcus felt his entire world tilt. 5 years of denial, ambition, and emotional distance collapsed beneath him in a single heartbeat. He understood exactly what he had done, and the knowledge nearly dropped him to his knees. He had walked away from the only future that truly mattered, and fate had just delivered the reckoning he never expected, but desperately needed. Marcus stood immobile, unable to move, barely able to breathe, as he watched the 2 little girls, who could only be his daughters. His heart hammered so loudly he wondered if anyone else could hear it. Every instinct he possessed screamed at him to go to them, to fall to his knees and beg for their forgiveness for not knowing, for not being there, for every lost moment he could never reclaim. Yet fear rooted him to the spot. What if he was wrong? What if Elena refused to let him near them? What if those little girls looked at him with confusion or fear instead of recognition and love? For the first time in his life, he understood the terror of having something to lose. Elena noticed him only after several seconds. Her smile slowly faded as her gaze followed the direction of his. The softness that had lit up her face moments before vanished completely, replaced by a wall of rigid caution and old wounds, reopening in an instant. She stood still, protective instinct surging through her like a wildfire, and in one fluid motion, she quietly called the girls over. Both turned at her voice and immediately ran to her, oblivious to the storm brewing between the adults who once shared a life-altering connection. Elena crouched to hug them, one arm around each daughter, as if shielding them from a threat. Marcus finally found the strength to move forward, though his legs felt weak and clumsy beneath him. The girls looked up at him with wide, curious eyes that matched his own, unaware of how their existence was rewriting the entire meaning of his life. He opened his mouth to speak, but realized he didn't even know where to start. The apology lodged in his throat felt too small to cover the magnitude of his sins. He finally managed to whisper, his voice broken and desperate. "Elena, are they?" Her eyes flashed with pain and accusation, and she straightened to her full height, pulling the girls slightly behind her legs. "Yes," she answered softly, but with a cutting edge that sliced right through his chest. "They're yours." She didn't scream. There was no dramatic scene, no raised voice. It was the quiet truth that broke him far more efficiently than any anger could have. Marcus fumbled for words, any words, but nothing came out. The reality crushed him like a wave, cold and heavy. He looked at the girls again, truly looked, and the similarities were undeniable. Both girls had his features, his expressions, the same spark in their eyes that once burned in his before he smothered it under ambition. They were 5 years old, 5 years of birthdays he missed, 5 years of first steps, first words, scraped knees, and bedtime stories he hadn't been there for. He remembered how his own parents had rarely shown up for him, too busy chasing their own careers, and a sickening panic washed over him, realizing he had done far worse. He hadn't been absent by accident, but by choice. His voice was barely audible when he finally spoke. "Why didn't you tell me?" It wasn't an accusation, though it sounded dangerously close. It was a plea for a reason that would be easier to accept than the truth he already feared. Elena let out a shaky breath, and her fingers tightened protectively around Hazel's shoulder. "The day I tried to tell you, you made it very clear I didn't matter. You were gone before I could say anything. I wasn't going to beg." Her voice cracked on the last word, despite her effort to stay composed. Marcus flinched as if struck. He remembered that day now with piercing clarity, his own cruel words echoing back to him like a court verdict. He had sentenced himself to this fate long before he even understood the consequences. Regret coursed through him violently, tinged with shame that left him breathless. "I'm sorry," he whispered, the apology sounding too small, inadequate for the ocean of pain he had inflicted. Elena looked at him, truly looked, and saw not the powerful CEO she once loved, but a man suddenly stripped of his certainty and arrogance. Her expression softened only slightly, but her anger was still there, simmering beneath every syllable. "Sorry doesn't change anything," she replied quietly. "They've grown up without a father. I raised them alone. They don't know you. They don't even know your name." The girls tugged at her clothes, sensing the tension but not understanding its source, and Elena gently stroked their hair reassuringly. Marcus watched that gesture with a pain so acute he almost stumbled. This was a family he had never known, a bond he had no right to break, yet one he so desperately wanted to be part of. Something inside him shifted permanently in that moment. Power, success, wealth. None of it mattered if he remained a stranger to the two hearts that should have been his greatest pride. He swallowed hard and forced himself to speak. Every word came out with raw sincerity. "I don't deserve a second chance, but I'm begging you, let me try. Let me know them. Let me make up for what I can." His voice broke with the weight of that plea. He had never begged in his life. Pride had once been his shield, but now it lay shattered at his feet. Elena's expression mirrored an emotional storm. She wasn't cruel. She wasn't trying to punish him. She was simply terrified. Terrified that allowing him near her daughters meant risking everything she fought to protect. "I need time," she said finally, her voice a fragile thread. "I need to think about what is best for them." Marcus nodded, accepting even that small mercy like a lifeline. Before he could say anything else, Hazel and Holly tugged at Elena's hands, wanting to go back to playing. Elena gave him one last look, full of unresolved questions and memories too painful to revisit. Then she turned away. Marcus remained rooted to the spot as he watched them go, his daughters glancing back with curiosity over their shoulders, unaware that his gaze was regaping his entire destiny. The distance between them grew with every step, but Marcus felt something new and powerful ignite within him, a determination he had never experienced before. He wouldn't vanish again. He wouldn't let go this time. He had already lost 5 years. He refused to lose another second. For the first time in his life, Marcus Sterling understood what it meant to fight for something that truly mattered. And he intended to fight with everything he had. Question time. The test of time. Marcus is fighting for redemption. How long should Elena make him wait before allowing him to officially be daddy? Comment your thoughts on her caution. Don't forget to like and subscribe. The long road to redemption. Marcus left the park that day a different man than the one who had entered. The world around him moved as usual. Cars passing, children laughing, business meetings, waiting. But inside him, something had shifted so drastically that it felt as if the ground beneath his feet no longer belonged to him. Everything he had spent years building suddenly felt meaningless compared to the 5 years of life he missed with his daughters. He went back to his office, not to bury himself in work, but to sit in silence at his desk, as the same question repeated endlessly in his mind. What kind of man had he been to walk away from the very people who should have mattered most? Sleep became impossible. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Hazel and Holly looking at him with innocent curiosity and no understanding of who he was. He pictured Elena's protective stance, the pain in her eyes, and the exhaustion she must have carried alone for years. Guilt consumed him until he could barely recognize the version of himself he had once been so proud of. He began reviewing old decisions, recalling every moment he pushed her away, all the missed calls when she tried to reach out before giving up entirely. The realization that she had tried, and he hadn't even listened, crushed him in a way success had never been able to fix. Marcus spent weeks trying to earn even the smallest shred of Elena's trust. He approached carefully, respecting her distance, sending messages instead of showing up unannounced, offering help without expecting gratitude. At first, Elena rejected everything. She had spent too many nights proving she didn't need him to survive. She didn't want the girls to get attached to someone who might leave again if life became inconvenient. Still, Marcus persisted, not with arrogance, but with a humility he had never known. He asked about the girls' favorite snacks, their hobbies, their schedules. He offered to help with school expenses, medical checkups, anything that could lighten her burden. Elena tested him repeatedly. She questioned his intentions. She demanded proof that his involvement wasn't a fleeting impulse fueled by guilt. Marcus accepted every challenge she presented, determined to prove he wasn't just trying to fix his conscience, but was ready to become a father in every sense. Slowly and cautiously, Elena allowed small interactions, starting with him meeting the girls at public places like playgrounds or cafes, where she remained close enough to intervene if anything went wrong. The first few encounters were awkward and tense. Hazel stared at him with boldness, studying his face with the intense curiosity of a child trying to understand something complicated. Holly stayed closer to Elena, clutching her hand tightly, peering from behind her mother's hip. Marcus didn't pressure. He sat on the grass, lowering himself to their level, and waited patiently while they continued to assess him. When he pulled out a coloring book and crayons, Hazel cautiously crept closer, dropping down beside him, as if daring him to keep up with her imagination. Marcus drew a clumsy cat, and she giggled at it, the sound so pure it hit him like sunlight, breaking through a storm. Holly eventually joined them, placing herself to Marcus's right, still watching him with a cautious heart. He wasn't offended by her hesitation. If anything, he admired her caution, a trait she must have inherited from the resilience Elena had developed. When the meeting ended, the girls waved goodbye to him, small motions filled with a brand new familiarity. That simple gesture made Marcus feel more victorious than signing any multi-million-dollar deal. Days turned into weeks, and Marcus devoted more time to his daughters, prioritizing them above everything else. He rearranged his schedule, canceled business trips, and let his assistant handle meetings that once demanded his full attention. He bought booster seats for his car, filled his phone with photos Elena sent of the girls' artwork, and silly expressions. He learned their favorite cartoons, the name of the teddy bear Hazel refused to sleep without, and the exact way Holly liked her hair brushed. He learned that Hazel loved to climb and explore, always running a little too far ahead, while Holly collected small treasures like rocks and bottle caps that she kept in an old lunchbox as if they were diamonds. For the first time since his own childhood, Marcus allowed himself to laugh without restraint, to feel without shame, to open his heart even when fear whispered that he could still lose everything. The girls, despite their initial hesitation, began to trust him in precious doses. Their acceptance of him wasn't dramatic or sudden. It came through everyday moments, Hazel grabbing his hand without thinking, Holly crawling onto his lap during a movie, both girls calling his name when something exciting happened, and wanting him to see it, too. Elena watched every interaction, her heart torn between happiness and panic. Seeing Marcus love her daughters made a part of her ache in ways she wasn't prepared for. She had spent years convincing herself she was enough, that being a single mother was a strength. But now, seeing the girls' eyes light up when Marcus arrived, she realized how much they had missed, how much she had tried to shield them from wanting something she believed they could never have. One rainy afternoon, after a particularly emotional day, where the girls begged Marcus to stay longer, Elena asked to talk. He expected another boundary, another warning, but instead she said something that terrified them both. She admitted she was scared. Scared that he would leave again. Scared that the girls would love him only to lose him. Scared that she would love him again too, and that the heartbreak would destroy her this time. Marcus listened with his heart wide open. He didn't defend himself. He didn't interrupt. He didn't try to justify his past. When she finally fell silent, bracing herself for his response, he reached out and said he wouldn't leave. Not when things were hard. Not when people expected him to. Never again. He confessed that he had never been strong before. Not truly. Because he ran from the one person who ever made him want to be better. He told her the girls had changed him, that their existence taught him what love truly meant. Elena didn't believe him instantly, but she didn't reject him either. She simply whispered that she needed time, in the same way he needed forgiveness. And without hesitation, Marcus said he would wait. Whether it took months, years, or the rest of his life, he would wait. Because for the first time, he understood that love wasn't something earned through success or status. It was built through showing up, over and over, even when fear threatened to tear everything apart. He had already lost 5 years. He wouldn't lose them again. The storm and the bond. Marcus never imagined that learning to be a father would feel like stepping into a whole new world, where every emotion was amplified, every mistake felt monumental, and every success filled his chest with a warmth he had never known. He threw himself into fatherhood with the same determination he once reserved for business. But this time, the stakes were far more personal. He discovered that raising 2 spirited 5-year-old girls was both chaotic and miraculous. A constant roller coaster of spilled juice, tangled hair, laughter that could erase the worst day, and tears that could reduce him to panic in seconds. He quickly learned that children didn't care about his powerful reputation or his intimidating presence. What they cared about was whether he showed up, whether he knelt on the floor instead of standing above their world, whether he listened when they spoke in their quick, excited voices about dreams that made no logical sense. At first, every interaction felt like a test he was doomed to fail. Hazel pushed boundaries, running ahead in grocery stores, or climbing anything taller than herself, forcing Marcus to race after her with a frantic urgency that made onlookers smile knowingly. Holly needed reassurance at nearly every turn, clinging to his sleeve if strangers walked too close or asking him to check the closet 3 times before bed. Marcus had to learn patience, gentle guidance, and how to kneel to eye level so Holly wouldn't feel overwhelmed. He found himself reading parenting articles at 2 a.m, highlighting sections on emotional support, communication, and trauma caused by absence. Every mistake weighed heavily on him. The first time the girls called him Daddy, the word sounded tentative, as if they were afraid to say it freely. Marcus spent the rest of the night sitting on his living room couch, staring into the dark, overwhelmed by gratitude and guilt so tightly entwined he couldn't separate them. Elena watched his efforts with quiet suspicion. Trust didn't grow quickly for her, but she saw how Marcus shifted his priorities without hesitation. Every afternoon he arrived early at the park or activity center where they met, often carrying their favorite snacks and greeting them with a smile that reached his eyes. He celebrated their smallest accomplishments as if they were major victories, clapping wildly when Hazel mastered a new climbing bar and kneeling proudly when Holly read her first full sentence from a children's book. There were moments when Elena caught him looking at her daughters with a love so pure and painful that it cut her breath, because she recognized that look. It was the one she once longed for him to give her. One rainy afternoon, everything changed in a way neither of them predicted. Elena had allowed Marcus to take the girls to the playground alone for the first time, wanting to foster the bond they were still building. The evening was supposed to be simple, filled with swings and fairy tale games. But a sudden summer storm rolled in, bringing loud claps of thunder that terrified Holly. The little girl bolted in a panic, running straight toward the darkening trees. Hazel called after her, but Holly was too scared to hear. Marcus chased after her with a fear that tore him more violently than anything he had faced in the business world. He finally caught her behind a thick bush where she was crouched, crying, covering her ears as thunder boomed overhead. He sank to his knees, his suit soaked by the sudden rain, and wrapped her in his arms, whispering soft words and shielding her from every rumble. He wasn't calm or composed. He was terrified, his heart pounding, afraid of losing her in a way that went far beyond physical danger. When Holly finally looked up at him with tear-stained cheeks and wrapped her arms around his neck, Marcus realized that trust wasn't something earned through perfect actions, but through showing up during the messy, scary moments, when love meant staying even in the storm. By the time Elena arrived, rushing over, her hair drenched and panic visible in her trembling hands, she found Holly nestled against Marcus's chest, while Hazel clung to his arm for comfort. The sight of her daughters choosing him as their safety shook her heart more profoundly than she expected. Elena thanked him with a voice she could barely keep steady, and Marcus simply nodded, afraid any words might lead him to fall apart. Driving home that night, Elena replayed the scene in her mind over and over, realizing that he had been there when it mattered most. She saw how his hands still shook long after the girls were calm, how he looked at them as if they were the most fragile, precious treasures in the world. A part of her, the part she had tried so hard to bury, began to soften in ways she wasn't ready to admit. Over time, Elena learned to share responsibilities with him. He began helping with bedtime routines, reading stories, where his deep voice brought dragons and princesses to life. Holly started falling asleep nestled against his side, comforted by the steady rhythm of his breathing. Hazel insisted he tuck her in last, claiming she needed the strongest hug before sleep. On certain nights, after the girls were safely dreaming, Elena and Marcus sat together in the living room, talking in low voices about school plans, future birthdays, and challenges the girls might face. Those conversations were cautious but intimate, like two people learning to trust language again, without letting old hurts speak too loudly. Marcus often looked at Elena with a mix of admiration and remorse, seeing her not as the girl he once walked away from, but as a woman who survived heartbreak and turned it into the warm, loving environment their daughters thrived in. He wondered if she knew how extraordinary she was, how her strength humbled him every day. Sometimes she caught him looking with that expression, and she would quickly look away, afraid of what it meant. Deep down, they both understood that the path they were on was delicate. Past pain still lingered like a shadow between them, but something new was quietly growing underneath, something hopeful, something terrifying. Something that could either heal everything or destroy them completely. Elena still carried fear, but she also carried a spark of possibility. Marcus carried regret, But he also carried a love so fierce, it left no room for abandonment ever again. The girls were learning what it felt like to be a family for the first time. Marcus was learning what it meant to be worthy of one, and Elena was learning that healing didn't mean forgetting, but allowing herself to believe in a future she once thought impossible. They were changing together, slowly, painfully, beautifully. The vow of presence. Time continued to move forward, blending days into weeks as the fragile structure of trust slowly rebuilt. But even as Marcus became a constant part of their lives, Elena carried a fear she couldn't quiet. The fear crept into her thoughts in the quiet hours of the night. What if he leaves again? What if this is temporary? What if the girls give him their whole hearts only to watch him walk away the moment the responsibility gets too heavy? She had spent years teaching herself to never expect help, to never rely on anyone but herself. Now she was watching her children attach themselves to the very man who once chose a future without them, and that terrified her more than loneliness ever had. Marcus understood he would always walk through a minefield of distrust when it came to Elena. Every mistake he made felt magnified. Every hesitation became a reminder of the past. Sometimes she flinched when he accidentally raised his voice while calling for the girls, not in anger, but to get their attention. Sometimes she tensed when he mentioned work, as if expecting him to say he had to leave again for something more important. He noticed all of it. He noticed the way her smile became guarded every time deeper feelings threatened to show. He noticed how she sat slightly angled away from him when they talked, as if protecting her heart with her posture. He didn't blame her for any of it. Every part of her distance was a wound he had inflicted. He sought help in ways he once believed were beneath him. He attended therapy, determined to dismantle the emotional armor he wore for so long. He unpacked his upbringing, where affection was rare, where success equaled love, where career goals were the only thing that earned praise. He confronted fears he didn't know he carried, discovering how deeply he had equated vulnerability with danger. He learned that opening his heart to love didn't make him weak. Closing his heart to love did. Meanwhile, Elena began to notice subtle shifts in him that she couldn't ignore. He never missed a day with the girls, even when he was sick or exhausted. He showed up to every parent-teacher meeting, every dance recital and sports event, cheering with the loudest voice in the room. He took the twins to the park on weekends, spending hours pushing swings, building sandcastles, and listening to their endless stories. He was there not just during the celebrations, but through tantrums, meltdowns, and scraped knees. Always patient, always present, always learning. One evening, after putting the girls to bed, Elena found Marcus still in the living room, sitting on the couch with a children's book open on his lap. He looked heartbreakingly sincere and weary, with dark circles forming under his eyes from long days juggling work and fatherhood. But he also carried a soft contentment she had never seen on him before. Without thinking, Elena joined him on the couch, leaving a comfortable space between them, and they began to talk in low voices. She confessed that every time she watched him care for her daughters, something inside her shifted in a way she couldn't control. He listened intently, not interrupting, giving her space to say everything she had swallowed for years. When she finally fell silent, bracing for his response, he admitted he had never stopped thinking about her after they broke up, and that the emptiness he lived with was his punishment for choosing ambition over love. The confessions left the air thick with emotion. Neither of them knew how to handle. One part of Elena wanted to lean into him, to allow her heart to reconnect with what she once believed was there forever. Another part of her wanted to run, because loving him again would mean trusting him to never abandon them. Marcus saw that conflict in her eyes. and he reached out gently, his voice low and firm, as he said he didn't expect forgiveness overnight. He understood that trust wasn't something asked for. It was something earned through consistency and time. He promised he would keep showing up, even on the days she doubted him most. Weeks later, Elena invited Marcus to her apartment for dinner, marking a significant shift in their dynamic. It was the first time the girls saw both parents sitting at the same table, sharing food, laughter, and stories like a family who never fell apart. The evening flowed naturally, with Hazel proudly showing Marcus her newest drawing, and Holly asking him to help cut her food. Elena watched from across the table, her heart swelling and trembling all at once, because the picture in front of her was so beautifully ordinary, something she dreamt of, but feared she would never have. As the girls played after dinner, Elena and Marcus stood near the kitchen sink, clearing dishes side by side. The simple domesticity of the moment wrapped around them like a warm blanket. Elena finally dared to say that she didn't want to run away anymore, that she could see the man he was now, and that her heart no longer refused to feel. Marcus exhaled shakily. Relief flooded his expression, and he told her she deserved happiness and peace, and that he wanted to spend his life providing both, if she would let him. Even then, the shadows of the past lingered, reminding them that healing wasn't linear. There were days Elena woke up terrified for no reason. Days Marcus questioned if he was enough. Days the guilt threatened to devour any progress they made. But their love was becoming a force neither of them could ignore anymore. Reborn from pain, rooted in growth, and nurtured by the two little girls who unknowingly tethered their parents' hearts together every day. Elena was starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, love could survive even the deepest wounds if two people fought hard enough to rebuild it. And Marcus was determined to prove he would never be the man who walked away again. The family they once lost was slowly, beautifully forming right in front of them, piece by fragile piece, guided by a love that refused to disappear. The unbreakable bond. Marcus knew he wanted to spend the rest of his life with Elena, long before he gathered the courage to put that desire into words. Every moment with her and the girls taught him what it truly meant to love someone. Not through grand gestures or the perfect timing, but through consistency, vulnerability, and the willingness to show up, even when fear whispered that everything could still fall apart. He had lost them once because he chose comfort over courage. He wouldn't repeat that mistake now. He planned his proposal with a care rooted not in extravagance, but in meaning, wanting every second to reflect how much his heart had changed and how deeply he treasured the family forming around him. He asked Elena if they could take the girls to the Portland Botanical Gardens one warm Saturday afternoon, a place filled with winding paths, bright flowers, and fountains glistening in the sun. Elena agreed, unaware of the ring hidden in his pocket, the promise waiting to unfold. The twins skipped ahead of them, holding hands and giggling at the butterflies fluttering in the air, while Elena and Marcus walked closely behind, their fingers brushing now and then in ways that sent soft waves of warmth through both of them. The day felt calm, almost dreamlike, as if the world itself approved of the future they were building. They reached a secluded garden, filled with soft pink roses, and a small pond where koi fish glided lazily through the clear water. The girls ran to the edge, excitedly pointing out fish, while Marcus guided Elena toward a wooden bench beneath a flowered archway. She sat beside him, still smiling as she watched the twins, unaware that her life was about to change again, in the most beautiful way. He turned to face her, his expression no longer casual, but brimming with emotion she felt even before he spoke. Her heart began to tremble inside her chest, sensing something important was approaching. Marcus told her there were times in his life when he believed success required emotional armor. Times he convinced himself that love was a weakness he couldn't afford. He admitted that walking away from her had been the biggest mistake he would ever make, one that haunted him every day until he found her again. He said that meeting their daughters changed the entire fabric of his soul, and that they taught him what love truly meant, to love fiercely, even when it terrified him. He reached for the small velvet box in his pocket, his hands shaking, not out of fear of rejection, but from the sheer weight of hope pressing against his heart. Elena's breath caught in her throat as Marcus sank to one knee in front of her. It felt unreal, as if the universe were stitching all her broken pieces right there beneath the blooming archway. The twins turned to watch. Their eyes widened with excitement as they sensed this moment was important. Holly grabbed Hazel's hand tightly and whispered something that made both girls grin from ear to ear. Marcus held out the open box, revealing a delicate ring that glittered like captured sunlight. But it was his voice that held the true beauty of the moment. He told her he didn't want to erase the past, because the past molded the strength she carried and the love she held so fiercely. He promised he would spend the rest of his life proving he was now the man she deserved, a man who would never again choose ambition over family. He asked her to marry him, not just for their happiness, but because he wanted to be the husband she could lean on, the father their daughters could always count on, and the partner whose loyalty would never fail again. His voice broke as he told her he loved her, not as a confession from a desperate man, but as a truth that would guide everything he did from this moment forward. Elena's tears fell freely, her heart swelling with more love than she thought she was capable of ever feeling. All the years of fighting alone, all the nights questioning if she would ever find light after the heartbreak, suddenly made sense, because they had led her back to the place where love could finally bloom without fear. She said yes, her voice filled with hope, shaky yet certain. The twins cheered and launched themselves into their parents' arms, wrapping all four of them in a group hug that felt like a promise sealed, not just by words, but by a bond that would never again be broken. They didn't rush the next step. Instead, they savored every moment that followed, planning a small ceremony where the girls could walk their mother down the aisle, choosing a home that belonged to all of them equally, and creating new traditions that felt like small celebrations of their healing. The day they exchanged vows, Elena walked toward Marcus with her daughters at her sides, each holding one of her hands. She met his eyes with confidence and peace. When they promised forever to each other, it wasn't the start of a new story. It was the continuation of one that refused to die, even when it fractured. After the reception, Marcus spun his daughters around the dance floor, while Elena watched with silent tears of joy. He finally understood what it meant to be complete. She finally felt her heart was safe, and the girls finally had both parents living under the same roof, loving them with everything they had. Their journey hadn't been perfect. It had been painful, messy, overwhelming, and terrifying. But because they fought through every difficulty instead of giving up, they emerged stronger than before. They learned that sometimes love doesn't arrive flawless. Sometimes it comes back after breaking, determined to rebuild itself into something unbreakable. The life they created was proof that love can survive mistakes, that forgiveness can grow where pain once reigned, and that second chances are worth risking everything when the heart finally chooses what truly matters. Their family was no longer divided by the past. Their future now belonged to all four of them. The true price of success. This story is a powerful reminder that true success is not measured by the height of the skyscraper, but by the depth of the love you build at home. Marcus chose to trade everything for ambition, only to find that his most valuable assets were the two little girls he almost missed. Elena's journey proves that courage is not the absence of fear, but the ability to love fiercely enough to demand the redemption you and your children deserve. Their love, reborn from betrayal, is now an unbreakable bond, a true testament to the power of presence and second chances. Rate this story from 1 to 10. Comment your favorite moment in the redemption arc. Don't forget to like and share.